There's a particular kind of room, and maybe you know it, where even silence feels like it's watching you, where the furniture may have changed, the curtains may be new and the people have moved on, yet something about the air still clings to your skin like memory. It's not loud, not obvious. No one else would notice it, but your soul does, because that room once knew your quietest kind of suffering. It once held the version of you who smiled when she wanted to scream, the version who dimmed her light so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable, the version who carried the weight of invisible expectations without ever being asked how much it hurt. And though the years have passed, though you've grown, healed, climbed, conquered, the walls remember. They remember not because they want to harm you, but because pain, like perfume, lingers long after the bottle breaks. You step inside and try to breathe like someone who's free. You tell yourself, I'm not that person anymore, but the breath catches halfway, because the body remembers what the mind has worked so hard to release. You stand there, and your spirit begins to fold in on itself, not because it is weak, but because it is wise, because it knows this is where it learned to shrink. This is where it first decided that quiet was safer than confrontation, that compliance was easier than conflict, that being needed was the closest thing it could feel to being loved. We speak often of healing as a destination, as if it were a mountain with a summit, a clear view, and a final exhale. But healing is not a finish line, it's a mirror, and some mirrors only appear when you return to the places that cracked you, not to punish you, but to ask, are you still choosing yourself even here? We go back, to houses, to people, to patterns, not always because we want to, sometimes because we need to know if we've truly changed, sometimes because we're still looking for a different ending to a chapter that never closed right. We think, if I show up as my strongest self this time, maybe the story will shift. Maybe this time they'll see me. Maybe this time I won't leave feeling hollow. But what if some stories were never meant to be rewritten? What if healing isn't a return to the scene of the pain, but a refusal to keep setting foot inside it? I once knew a man who, after years of emotional abuse in his childhood home, returned there in his 30s to make peace. He believed he had done the inner work. He had forgiven. He had processed. He was ready. But as soon as he sat in that old kitchen, with the same chipped table and the same creaking faucet, he felt himself slip. His posture changed. His voice softened, not in wisdom, but in fear. His laughter lost its fullness, and by the end of the night, he wasn't the man he had become. He was the boy who once sat there trying not to be too much. No matter how enlightened you become, no matter how strong your boundaries or sharp your insights, when you re-enter a space that only ever knew you as wounded, it's hard to be received as anything else. The energy recognizes your former shape, not your current form. The space remembers the silence, not the sound of your truth. And here's where the spiritual invitation lies, not in staying, not in proving, but in recognizing when a space can no longer honor who you are becoming. You are not here to beg old rooms to evolve. You are here to build new ones, to walk toward places where your growth is not just tolerated, but seen, welcomed, celebrated. Because while forgiveness may happen in your heart, wholeness requires environment. You cannot plant new seeds in poisoned soil and expect a thriving garden. Even a healed tree will die if the earth around it is starved of sun. Ask yourself gently, why am I drawn back here? Am I seeking redemption or recognition? Am I here to prove I'm no longer broken, or because a part of me still doubts that I'm whole? And more importantly, can I accept that healing might not be about being strong there, but about finally choosing to be free elsewhere? You are allowed to outgrow what you once fit inside. You are allowed to stop knocking on doors that only ever opened when you were hurting. You are allowed to grieve the comfort of what you've outgrown and still walk away. Because the truth is, a place that only ever knew your silence will struggle to hold your voice. A place that learned to see you broken may never recognize you whole. And some spaces aren't meant to heal you. They're meant to teach you that you can survive them, and then teach you how to leave. We like to believe that if we endure something long enough, it becomes wisdom, that the very pain that tried to break us will somehow, with time and patience, turn into gold. That if we just stay a little longer, give a little more, love a little harder, we might finally transform the place that hurt us into something holy, as if our tenderness could fix what wasn't built for love, as if our silence could somehow teach someone how to listen. as if by offering more of ourselves we might finally earn the safety we never had to begin with. But not all pain is meant to be redeemed. Not every story was written to have a healing arc. Some pain isn't here to be turned into art or meaning or wisdom. Some pain is here to teach us how to leave, how to let go, how to recognize that survival is not the same as peace, that staying, no matter how spiritual it feels, is not always the brave thing. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is to walk away from the very thing you prayed would finally hold you. And yet we stay, not because we don't see the truth, but because we've learned how to survive within the discomfort. We've memorized the rhythm of the chaos. We know exactly when to speak and when to go silent. We know how to shape-shift to avoid triggering what never learned how to stay soft. We learn where the cracks are, how to step lightly. And with time, that pain, that aching familiarity, becomes its own kind of comfort. Not because it nourishes us, but because at least we know how it works. At least we know how to endure it. The mind, when taught fear early, will often choose familiar suffering over uncertain peace. And so we confuse endurance with strength. We confuse loyalty with love. We tell ourselves that leaving would be betrayal, that walking away is failure, that if we were really strong, really spiritual, really good, we'd find a way to stay with more grace, more patience, more compassion. But what kind of love demands that you disappear? What kind of loyalty asks you to betray yourself again and again just to keep the peace? Some places, some people, some dynamics only know how to love the version of you that stayed small enough to be non-threatening, the version of you that didn't ask for much, the version of you that dimmed your light so others wouldn't feel their own shadows. And the moment you grow, the moment you begin to expand into your voice, your truth, your power, they no longer know where to place you. They try to pull you back into the old dance, the old dynamic, the old version of you they were comfortable with. But you've tasted something now. You've touched a different way of being, honest, unfiltered, fully awake. You've seen what it feels like to speak and not shrink, to be loved without performance, to feel peace that doesn't cost you your integrity. And once you've felt that, no matter how familiar the old pattern is, it can't hold you the same way anymore. You try, perhaps, out of nostalgia, out of hope, but your soul is different now. It no longer bends the way it used to, and that difference is not arrogance, it's awakening. So yes, at first it might feel lonely. Yes, it might feel foreign to walk away from what you've known for so long. There will be moments where the silence is louder than the chaos ever was. Moments where you wonder if you made a mistake. But slowly, gently, the silence begins to sing. Not with noise, but with clarity, with truth, with a strange kind of peace that doesn't demand explanation, just presence. And in that quiet, you'll begin to understand that this loneliness, this space, this distance, isn't punishment. It's protection. It's preparation. It's the ground clearing itself for something new, something real, not just from the world, but from yourself. A life built on truth, not toleration. A love that doesn't ask for pieces of you. A peace that doesn't come at the cost of your aliveness. And so, slowly, you stop going back. You stop trying to fit. You stop explaining the ways you've grown. You stop defending your softness, your standards, your soul. You start choosing honesty, even when it means being misunderstood. You start choosing peace, even when it means being alone. You start choosing yourself, even when it means walking away from everything that once defined you. Because sometimes, the place that hurt you most is the one that keeps calling you back, not to heal you, but to remind you who you were before you knew better. And your only task now is to remember that knowing and honor it, not with guilt, not with shame, but with reverence. Because even if it's quiet, even if it's unfamiliar, what you're building now is real. And that reality begins with one choice: to no longer mistake endurance for love, and to let truth, not fear, guide your next step forward. There comes a moment, not loud or sudden, but soft and undeniable, when you realize that staying is no longer sacred. It doesn't come with a breakdown or a crisis. It arrives like a whisper from somewhere deep within, a subtle but piercing truth that gently insists, this is not where you're meant to remain. You feel it in the way your body stops settling, in the way your spirit begins to resist the very air around you, not because you're angry, not because you failed, but because something in you has grown beyond the walls that once held you. You look around and start to see clearly what you once tried so hard not to notice. The quiet tension, the subtle bending of your boundaries, the way your joy had to shrink in order to keep the peace. You recognize how many versions of yourself you had to bury just to keep belonging in a space that no longer recognizes who you're becoming. You try, of course. You always do. You pour more love into the cracks, thinking maybe it will hold this time. You try to be more understanding, more patient, more accommodating, thinking maybe this is what healing looks like, to stay with compassion, to love with perseverance. But deep down you know, healing does not mean endlessly pouring yourself out where there is no container strong enough to hold you. It doesn't mean proving your worth through endurance. It means learning when to stay soft and when to walk away before softness becomes sacrifice. So eventually, with the kind of clarity that comes not from logic, but from soul, you leave, not with fury, not with slammed doors, not with the need to make them see or understand. You leave like mist lifting from a quiet field at dawn, gentle, natural, inevitable. You leave not to escape, but to return to yourself. You leave because your spirit is tired of negotiating for oxygen in a room where you always have to earn the right to breathe. And no, it won't feel like triumph. It will feel like loss. A strange and private grief will settle in your bones, not only for what you're walking away from, but for the pieces of yourself that stayed far too long. You'll grieve the dreams you had to let go of, the hopes you held with both hands, the way you twisted yourself into softer and smaller shapes, hoping it would finally be enough. You'll mourn the silence you kept, the truths you swallowed, the weight of carrying so much without being asked how much it was costing you. But beneath the ache, something else will stir, something quieter than victory, but deeper than relief. A trembling liberation, a gentle kind of freedom that doesn't come with applause but with space, the space to breathe again, to sit in your own presence without shame, to stop editing yourself to fit into a story that was never written for your healing. You begin to understand that leaving was not the betrayal, staying was, staying after you knew, staying after you heard the whisper and tried to silence it, staying after your soul started knocking louder and louder, asking you to come home. And so, you stop asking for permission. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop needing the pain to get worse just to justify your choice. You simply go, with love, with grace, with the understanding that you don't need to hate what you're walking away from in order to honor the fact that you can no longer stay, because pretending is not peace, performance is not connection. And healing, real healing, does not bloom in places where you have to lie to yourself just to be accepted. So you leave, not because you're bitter, not because you gave up, but because you finally remembered that your freedom is sacred, that your breath matters, that your becoming cannot be negotiated down to what others are ready for. And maybe, just maybe, the most loving thing you will ever do for yourself is to walk away without needing to be understood, to choose your soul over your comfort, to choose your truth over your role, to say, with quiet certainty, I am no longer who I was when I first walked into this place, and that is reason enough to walk out. You reach a point in your healing where the silence no longer scares you, where you stop needing the noise to feel alive, the approval to feel worthy, the closeness to feel whole, where you begin to realize that what you were searching for in all those places, all those people, all those rooms that made you feel like you had to shrink just to belong, was never something they could give you. It was something you had to come home to, within. Healing isn't always dramatic. It doesn't always happen in the light. Sometimes it happens in the quiet hours of the morning, when you wake up and no longer feel the need to check your phone. Sometimes it happens in the space between breaths, when you no longer feel the ache to be understood. Sometimes it happens when you sit down at a table alone and feel no emptiness, just peace, just presence, just you. Finally enough, you start to notice the difference between being tolerated and being loved, between being invited and being chosen, between being useful and being cherished. You see how long you stayed in places that couldn't see you, because some part of you thought that if you gave enough, stayed long enough, tried hard enough, maybe they'd realize what you were worth. But you realize now, love that needs to be proven through suffering isn't love. It's a transaction dressed in intimacy, and you're not a product. You're a presence. There is a deep kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying yourself through rooms that were never meant to hold you, a spiritual fatigue that sets in when your soul has outgrown the stories your body is still walking through. You start to feel it in the way you lose your voice, not because it's taken, but because you've stopped hearing it. In the way your light dims slowly, quietly, and no one even notices because they've only ever loved you in half light. And so you begin again. You gather what's left of your truth, and you leave the place that forgot how to hold it. Not in a rush, not in anger, but with the solemn grace of someone who has finally remembered who they are. You stop explaining. You stop apologizing. You stop waiting for permission to choose yourself. You walk away not to prove a point, but because the point has already been proven. By the way, your spirit softened the moment it was no longer asked to harden itself in order to stay. You begin to see healing for what it really is, not the absence of pain, but the presence of truth, not the fixing of the past, but the returning to the part of you that never needed to be fixed. You realize you don't need to be understood by people who only ever knew the edited version of you. You don't need to be accepted by places that asked you to fragment just to keep the peace. You don't need to be loyal to the story if it means being disloyal to your soul. And yes, there is grief, deep, sacred grief. Grief for the time lost, grief for the love poured into empty cups, grief for the silence that was mistaken for peace. But that grief is not a sign you made the wrong choice. It's the cost of finally telling the truth. It's the cost of leaving a chapter that could not hold the next version of you. There is a kind of life waiting for you now. Not the one where you're endlessly fixing and pleasing and performing, but the one where your existence is enough, where your joy doesn't scare anyone, where your boundaries don't threaten love, where you don't have to explain your softness or apologize for your strength. And maybe you don't know exactly where that life begins. Maybe you're standing on the edge of it now, trembling, uncertain, carrying only what you've salvaged from the wreckage. But here's what I promise you. There are places in this world that will not ask you to shrink. There are people who will not flinch when you speak your truth. There are rooms that will echo with your laughter and still hold your silence with reverence. There is a version of your life where you are not surviving yourself, you are celebrating yourself. But to reach that life, you have to stop returning to the one that taught you how to disappear. You can't heal in the same place that broke you. You can't become who you were meant to be in the environment that convinced you were too much. You can't find peace in the story that only ever asked you to suffer beautifully. So you step out, into the quiet, into the unknown, not because it's easy, not because you're ready, but because there is a voice inside you, soft, steady, sacred, that says, I deserve more than survival. I deserve to feel alive. And maybe, just maybe, that voice has always been your soul, calling you home.